dungeon. Ah, the Still Learning the Ropes evil had decided to try the excellent tutorials. Good choice. In this childishly simple introductory mission, it would learn the basics of dungeon management. Things like digging, building rooms, and hiring and firing creatures. Everything a novice evil needs to know. First of all, it admired the center of its power, the dungeon heart. This, if possible, should never be broken, as that would lead to an inglorious and permanent end to the definitely wanting to avoid this at all costs evil. Naturally, the most important resource for any evil genius was gold. One can make the best things out of the glittering metal, and nary a creature was going to let the absolute evil hire it and push it around without a coin or two. Sad, I know, but that's the way the cold, hard capitalist world of evil works. Although a little gold could also be stored in the dungeon heart, the little snots, the strange name giving evil's workers, had to travel long distances to do so. It made much more sense to build a treasury nearby. The fast-learning evil immediately began doing so. Sometimes the bored evil's little snots didn't work quickly enough. That was the time to give them a hearty slap with the hand of terror. Naturally, this had to be done immediately. Calculating evil threw a cagey glance at its population limits. These were divided into little snots and creatures. As opposed to creatures, little snots did not have to be hired separately, but were always regenerated up to the maximum limit. And so it was that the massacring evil didn't have to worry if one of these miserable creatures died. It simply had to wait for the next one. At the same time, the little snots were the dungeon workers who dug the galleries, mined the gold, and took care of any number of other things. That's why it was never a bad idea to increase their maximum limit. The thirsty for more little snots evil hurriedly began work. The corresponding research was kindly unlocked for the absolute evil. This was necessary in the tutorial in order not to confuse it with the wide range of possibilities. Besides, there are people out there who really do everything wrong. Unfortunately, creatures were a little more demanding than the miserable little snots. A hideout would have to be researched before creatures such as goblins and orcs could be hired. As loyal as the little snots were, they were unable to fight and took to their heels in panicked flight at the first sight of an enemy. Sighing, the unscrupulous evil set about providing a hideout. The army craving evil had hired a creature which would from now on do its dirty work. However, each creature consumed a population point. Fortunately, these could be increased just like the number of workers. Should it become necessary to recover a population point, the maliciously grinning evil could always use the egress located at its dungeon heart. Simply toss the creature onto it, a little pull of the lever, and oh, whoops. Well, there it goes. These creatures were pretty spoiled. Not only did horde creatures demand their own bunks, they also wanted something to eat. Otherwise, they would soon refuse to do any work whatsoever and go on strike. The deeply sighing evil had no other choice than to build his creatures a gobbler farm to satisfy their hunger. Excellent work. The gobbler farm was now ready. Later, the creatures would also demand other things, but for now, they were satisfied. The fast-learning evil had mastered the first tutorial with flying colors. Excellent work. Evil, evilness. The fast-learning evil quickly set about sending its creatures into the overworld. The fast-learning evil had begun the second tutorial. It now more or less knew what it had to do to build a dungeon. Now it would turn to the overworld, where it would sow chaos and destruction. Up there waited a Isle of Good, which just begged to be destroyed. The impatient evil got right down to destroying. Before the overworld could be destroyed, a number of creatures would first have to be brought there. The Hand of Terror greedily reached out to grab some. First, creatures ventured out into the overworld. The destruction-craving evil could hardly wait to transform all those unbearably rich colors into 50 shades of gray. The drooling evil did not have the omnipotence in the overworld it was used to in the dungeon. Here, it had to direct its creatures the old-fashioned way, with orders. The Isle of Good had been destroyed. To the ground. This not only made for a more pleasant ambiance, but also produced some lovely evilness, which could be used for research. The researching evil quickly set about spending its evilness. The troop-hungry evil had increased its population limit and could from now on hire more creatures. A great decision. The fantastic evil had understood the basics of the overworld and the advantages of evilness in the blink of an eye. Not that those were difficult concepts, but hey, you take what you can get, so good work. Dungeons for advanced students. The skilled evil quickly learned the skills needed to run a dungeon very efficiently. The knowledge-thirsty evil obviously couldn't get enough of these crazy tutorials. All right then, let's improve our knowledge of the dungeon. The Absolute Evil's creatures gathered experience from battles over the course of time, and thus reached new levels. This was to be welcomed, as higher-level creatures were much more powerful. Unfortunately, the creatures also became harder to please as their levels increased, and had the impudence to demand new things. Unbelievable! But that borders on treason. Horde creatures, for example, would later demand beer that they themselves produced in the brewery. But the brewery was still a long way off, as the annoyed evil's little snots had once again proved their lack of intelligence and hadn't built any workplaces in the dungeon. Toolboxes would later be needed for the brewery. These were produced by little snots at workplaces in the workshop. Sighing, the once again disappointed by its workers' evil, set about building the workplace. The little snots willingly set to work producing toolboxes with a stupid grin on their faces. These were needed to build the workplace in the brewery. A cast iron brewing kettle made out of toolboxes? Computer game logic. The not particularly known for its patience evil patiently waited for enough toolboxes to be available. The splendid evil had finally produced enough toolboxes by waiting in boredom. It quickly set about building the brewing kettle. The brewing kettle stood proudly, and the diligent little snots went directly to work producing the delicious brew, so that the horde creatures could soon start knocking it back. All that was missing was someone playing some good old-fashioned folk music. Then again, maybe not. Always makes my ears bleed. But now for something completely different. as the hard-working evil now had access to the lecture hall. There, additions to normal research in the form of scrolls could be made for small amounts of gold, time, and evilness. The always slathering for something new evil quickly began to try them out. Payday. Excellent choice. Excellent choice. Splendid work. The good-humored evil had not only satisfied its alcoholic creatures, but at the same time learned more about research. It now considered itself well equipped to begin converting the lessons learned into evil, nasty deeds. The final exam. The chock full of knowledge evil now faced the challenge of preparing its dungeon for real dangers. And now it's time for a good book. I still have this comic, and if I were to make myself a drink, I could... Oh, wait. You're here? What? I thought we'd done all the tutorials. What do you mean the menu offers a fourth tutorial? But I don't have any more documents for that. I'd love to work with professionals just once. Those boneheads at Realmforge can't even get the main menu right. They're probably busy building the Berlin airport. Well, since you're already here, we can... Oh, crap. Third person. Well, since the already arrived evil was already there, I can probably forget that drink. The keeping the narrator from his hard-earned drink and his lovely Marvel comic book evil commenced yet another tutorial. In this one, it would, learn something about, traps and spells, like how to make and use them. It was a pretty free-form tutorial, as if someone had just made it up really quickly. It was about defending the dungeon against attacking heroes. A few traps had already been placed. These were ready to make life difficult for every hero that approached them. Some others were manually triggered by a blow from the Hand of Terror. Here, timing was everything. The Arcanium already held a lot of mana, ready to be used for powerful spells. A suspicious trampling of heavy boots and clanging of armor was heard in the dungeon. Soon, the first heroes would enter the dungeon. Enemies have entered the dungeon. Enemies have entered the dungeon. The dungeon heart is being attacked. Enemies have entered the dungeon. There are enemies in your dungeon. Your dungeon heart is under attack. Enemies have entered the dungeon. All right, excellent work. The last hero had been fended off. The tutorial was finished. Finally, I can get back to my gin and super. Well done. So, now it's time you turn to other things. Things that don't stop me from drinking and from reading my comic.